I'm going to ask you three to give us a really quick background on who you guys are and maybe some things that people may not know about you and the company that you're currently running. And without further ado.
Sure. Ooh, that's loud. How about that? My name is Peter Hamilton. As Pepe told me, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Pepe, for putting this together, getting us all in a room, because this is ridiculous that we don't talk more and start figuring out how to bridge the gap between this like brand and performance, like programmatic and performance. It's like it's so close, but it's just not quite there. So maybe we can unearth some of that. So thanks for putting this together. Tune is an attribution measurement platform for mobile. We launched in 2012 on the app side of things. We were always web before that. And we've just seen a lot of twists and turns along the way, even this week as things continue to evolve in this space. So we just try to stay ahead as much as we can and help companies figure out how to be the best they can be in mobile.
Hey guys, my name is James Peng. Some of you may know me around the mobile space. Started at Storm8 and then headed mobile acquisition there. And over the past few years, I was head of mobile for Match Group, overseeing spend across Match, OkCupid, Plenty of Fish, Tinder, and more. And then over the past several months, I've been consulting and basically leading mobile acquisition strategies and growth teams across like primarily non-gaming companies, but names such as like Simple Habit, Coffee Meets Bagel, Tally Financial, and just quite a lot more.
Hi, I'm Guillaume McIntyre. I'm currently the head of digital marketing at Instacart. For those of you who don't know, it is a grocery delivery app. I think it's a great service. You should use it. And before Instacart, I spent some time at Netflix, where I built and established the programmatic team for Latin America across 30 plus countries, including Mexico, everything south of that, as well as the Caribbean. I've also spent some time at startups on the consumer side, B2B, and across a few industries.
Thank you for that. So I think we're going to get a few things out of this. We're going to get a promo code for Instacart later for everybody, right? And
it's a Chartboost 10.
Go check it out, guys. We know you all are busy, so try it, right? So we're going to jump right in because time is money, and I'm going to go to Peter first. So Peter, Tune recently published a paper that was really quite interesting about dinosaurs and unicorns that are dinosaurs. We have one of our own right over here. But essentially, the gist of the paper was that there is a really strong correlation between the evaluation of the company and the spend that you see on mobile. So two questions. First of all, what made you think of that? Sort of what was your thought process when you were looking into that? And second of all, can you share some of the findings that people in this room can use going forward and that can possibly become the pillars of successful strategy in their everyday life? No pressure.
Thank you. Yeah, she didn't even prep me with this question. Well, first of all, how many of you are like members or have been to an event with the Mobile Marketing Association? Anybody? Okay, there's like 4 people. Shame on all of you. Because so I've been on the global board of that for 3 or 4 years, and it has been the most frustrating experience of my life at certain times, because we're sitting around the table with Fortune 100 CMOs, and 3 years ago they were saying, there's no way to measure mobile, that's the problem, and I'm like a measurement company, and I'm like, I swear to you there is, and they're like, no, there isn't, and so you know, that room has changed in the last 3 years. The people sitting around that table, the CMOs of these different companies that are being the most successful in mobile and in our market, the names are changing. Some of these are mobile first companies. Some of these are companies that have just discovered their business model on mobile, and they've started to make that pivot and that transition. And so we wanted to understand what's the correlation between a company's investment into mobile as a channel, as a platform, as a user experience, and like their actual success, like in the stock market. And we found that there's a really strong correlation, that they almost twice outperform the laggards. and have on average a 15% Q over Q performance improvement against those that aren't investing. And it's actually, and you should check out the report, super cool, lots of cool graphics. Also some very ominous graphics about Amazon eating the earth. But it's really, it's inspiring to see that it really, people are starting to see mobile as the center of the user experience. And those that have invested and have done well in that category, they're the bulls in their markets. They absolutely are almost every single time. So we wanted to just like definitively demonstrate that and show the market, hey, this is important. You should pay attention. If you're not investing heavily, you will get crushed.
Invest heavily and use attribution to understand where things are working and aren't, otherwise you will get crushed. That's very ominous. So James, in your everyday, like Pepe said, you've been around for quite a while, since before, or since I guess right after App Store became a thing, and you've done user acquisition for various portfolios. You've been judged on your performance, obviously, every single day, right? And the landscape has changed quite a bit. What are the things that you see that have been hugely improved on in the industry? And what are the old strategies that are still working for you that you've been implementing and using for years and years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of things we've changed. I think as ad marketers, we've seen the kind of world change from CPI focus to like down even further down funnel events to kind of where we're at now, which is kind of a mess of things, right? Not only measurement, but just fraud and figuring out what's real. So I think a lot of things that have improved is I think marketers getting more sophisticated in understanding kind of what sources they need to be buying on, and kind of being smarter about the metrics they need to optimize around to avoid certain pitfalls, like for example wasting dollars on fraud and things and metrics that you might have thought were great to optimize toward previously. I think things that haven't improved so much are probably are a lot of the I think standardized mechanics of how to think about attribution from the app install side, mainly because we've kind of been stuck in the same world, and this hasn't even changed because it's easy. It's easy to kind of go along with the default. So I think even as some of the buying mechanics, the targeting and methodologies have gotten much more advanced, a lot of the measurement has not kind of moved in lockstep. So I've seen a lot of companies evolve and start to kind of bridge outside of app too, in terms of like the products they offer, the way that they tend to measure the business. And I think there's still quite a lot of room, though. We're still really in the infancy of all this.
Guillaume, how about Instacart? So you've joined the team, you're leading the marketing team. What does it look like for you?
What does it look like in terms of the mobile strategy?
In terms of the changes in strategy that you've implemented since you've been leading the team, and what do you see as the biggest improvements over your time with the team? Yeah,
so I think one of the things we've really pushed for, and I've really challenged the people on my team, is to really prioritize inventory that we think is transparent, that we think has little fraud, and that is as measurable as possible. And so we think that everything that is harder to measure, everything that where we feel that there's a lot of unknowns or a lot of potential fraud, then although we do believe that there's some good traffic, we naturally shy away from that and focus on things that we can build for the long term, and where we can measure performance more easily.
I swear we didn't even rehearse this, but this is opening up perfectly some of the questions that will follow. So let's keep some of those. But performance advertising and performance UA has traditionally been spearheaded by games, and because your metrics are very clear, especially in mobile. So some of the things that you guys can think of that marketers can learn from, and kind of maybe bridge the gap between the two. What are your recommendations?
So everyone's like,
we're all looking at him. Yeah.
He's the expert.
So one thing I've learned kind of over the years is, when starting and buying games, it's very easy to just buy across kind of all traditional ad networks, and I think there's a lot of inventory just readily accessible to you. But kind of shifting over to the non-gaming side, that world drastically changes, because I think with some of the points that LiveRamp covered, it's really becomes like people-based instead of publisher-based, and cutting up those publishers becomes a lot more complicated in terms of like finally addressing and finding the audience that you want, because it's not just a brand issue. Performance side, you've got to make that work too for non-gaming too. So I think kind of combining that plus the kind of current environment that we're in has been incredibly challenging, because a lot of the ad networks don't, that same environment and the same, I think, lens of who the users are just isn't readily accessible. So that's where I think, programmatic really comes in to kind of help us to address these issues. I think a lot of the visibility, the transparency is going to help us to be able to actually target the people that we actually want to acquire, and the users that are actually relevant. I've seen a lot of this change from, again, going from ad networks and finding ways to avoid fraud. More recently, a lot of the apps and projects I'm working on are focused on actually going direct to the source instead of applying to networks, just because finding ways to access that inventory directly, and why not go directly to find the users that you want instead of trying to kind of spray and pray and let the kind of machine learning and optimization kind of work for you. So I think there's been quite a lot of changes over the years, and overall I think it's the kind of transparency and understanding the user that's going to help us to reach those goals.
I think one of the things that you already touched on really is that just because it's easy to buy doesn't mean it's good. And in the brand world, that's why programmatic is like so great. I can just deploy this budget, and I know how much it's going to be, and I know when it's going to be done. And my CFO gets that, and they've gotten that for a long time, right? But the reality is that, especially in the in-app world and in the performance world, is it's not yet to a place where it can scale like that. You are managing like a lot of relationships. Something that the gaming companies have done very well is figured out where those are, figured out the ones outside of the duopoly that give them some sort of competitive edge, whether that is a network or is a direct publisher. They've fought to find who those folks are. They've, climbed through the swamp of measurement to understand exactly what that publisher is providing them. They've gone deep, deep, deep into fraud. And most brands are still kind of at the surface level when it comes to like mobile fraud or in-app fraud, right? It's like day one over there. So if there's something they could learn, like if you were just like to say, I'm the new head of UA for X giant Fortune 100, it would be to look for the things others aren't finding, right? It would be to go outside of the normal buying channels, and to realize that just buying sort of blindly on the kind of programmatic that you did on the web is different on mobile, and you should be applying these new techniques, these new fraud measurement capabilities to understand like what's the real fruitfulness of those buys.
Yeah, one thing that I would add is at the end of the day, I think that there will always be challenges with measurement and assessing what's performing best, what's not performing as well. But I think what's important is to be really focused on what is driving true business impact. And sometimes that might mean, there might be a misalignment with marketing metrics, but one of the things that we look at very closely is how much incremental revenue do we get from our marketing spend. And if we think that the answer is very low, then we need to change what we're doing so that, as we continue to grow, we drive additional business impact. And I think that means, we have to look beyond cost per install. We have to look beyond, cost per conversion or whatever metric marketers typically use. And I think that if you can really align yourself to, business metrics, then, we think that's a good strategy to build long-term value for the company and for the marketing team.
I think, cost per install has become a currency, and it gets confused between being a currency versus being a KPI. And so for a long time, marketers like hammered it as the KPI that they were triumphantly seeking inside their organizations. But really, it's the currency, and this was brought up on the panel before. Like, what's going to be the currency? Well, I guess it could be CPI. I mean, and at the end of the day, that's really just a click, right? It's a click from one place to another. You just have to go through this app store hocus pocus to get to the other side. So it's the equivalent, really, of the bridge, so to speak, from publisher to advertiser. And maybe that could be the form of currency, but how do we bring that into this programmatic environment? How do we make it easy for people to understand that that's what's moving around? It's not the ultimate KPI. And I hear every day from ad networks right now, they're getting hammered and they're saying, now it's moving from CPI to cost per reg, but I get paid the same for a reg as I used to get paid for a CPI, right? So how in the world am I supposed to make it in this crazy world? So I do think like nailing the currency is going to be important in order for us to scale this together.
I think, kind of moving from the gaming to non-gaming, a lot of us got really hooked on CPI and kind of down funnel metrics optimizing towards those, right? I mean, I think that's where a lot of the fraud came in. And I think when you look at more advanced advertisers, when they realize they have found the right person that they're targeting, at that point in time, you stop caring so much about cost per install as a metric and start to actually move up to say, hey, if I've actually found a way to isolate those people that actually want, then I actually want more of that, right? So you can actually move up to CPM as a factor. So I think a lot of it's just
arbitrage.
Right, exactly, kind of the oldest thing in the book. So kind of moved from like CPI to down funnel now way back up to CPM, which who knows? I'm wondering what this ultimate metric is going to be as well.
Once you figure out what your right user is, and once you look into the profile of what that person is, there is a lot of in-app inventory. If you know the identifiers, the behavior of the person that you're going after, there is so much to buy. And so how do you recommend that your clients and Guillaume, your team looks into in-app inventory and fits it more holistically into your strategy to try and find the right user? Because it seems to me that at the moment, it still is sort of a separate beast where there's a separate team that's working on buying effectively in-app and optimizing around that.
Okay, sure. So the biggest problem with, I would say, just advertising across the old theme of ad networks is just again, you cannot just identify and isolate the people you want within a sub-publisher. I think that's been the biggest difficulty is that let's say previously when I was acquiring for dating apps, you don't want everyone in a game, but there is someone valuable in there, right? So how do you carve that person out? And how do you avoid, let's say, the married people, the kids? And so a lot of that has been kind of moving to programmatic and allowing kind of the free flow of information and targeting, and just allowing kind of third parties to help us to find the right users and any other kind of proprietary targeting that you do have. So I think a lot of that's been key to really succeeding there, and it's really why it's kind of the methodology of like why waste impressions. I don't, first of all, if I could avoid those in the first place, my every dollar I spend could be much more effective. So I think targeting is going to be your best friend here. And kind of just the easiest way to access that targeting is to really open up the inventory, which has been the most difficult part of buying kind of traditional in-network inventory. So I think that's probably the first tool to succeed.
Yeah, I think that once you've identified your ideal customers and you have an idea of where they are, I think you just have to test and see if that actually works for you, right? Because I think that a lot of times, you could sit around and talk to your colleagues and feel that you found the perfect app with the perfect users, and you test it and the performance doesn't shake out the way you had expected. And so I think you have to test as fast as you possibly can, measure, iterate, and keep doing that.
There's not really a great consolidated technology for publishers, right? So when it comes to slicing out the exact right person across a lot of publishers, there's some work for our industry to do, or for someone to come in and save the day, or whatever that looks like. We are starting to see a little commercial for LiveRamp, seeing them work with lots of publishers direct and work with networks and those working with our customers that are like the Fortune 100s, because they want to be even more careful not to target the people that aren't a part of their demographic. And it's almost a brand safety kind of concern. And by applying some of this data, they can actually go after who they think are the right targets and those like maybe very different kinds of publishers. It's still kind of early days for that. We've just started picking up on that happening really in the last 6 months. It does seem to be ramping in a live way, but yeah, so far I agree that targeting is really going to be key to this.
At the moment, where do you guys find your best users? Peter, obviously not for you because everybody knows where you guys are and people come to you. But
Right here.
Right here. But James and Guillaume, where do you find your best users and sort of what strategy does it take to get to the place where you isolate the sources and how much of your budgets go to the sources where users of great quality and how much of the budgets are going towards the test sources?
So,
percentage. You don't have to give us actual numbers.
sure. So I don't have the exact number. Ian, who's in the room, can tell you. But I would say that what we are doing today is that we're moving as much of an investment away from the traditional networks into programmatic because we feel that that's what we need to get really good at. And so almost on a monthly basis, we assess how much are we spending on the networks, how much are we spending programmatically, and how quickly can we move almost all of our spend to be purchased programmatically. And so that's at a high level, that is the strategy that we employ.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think it's inevitable that majority of the budget's going to, right at current day, be allocated to Facebook and Google, just because of the intent and the modeling that you can put behind finding the right user. So I think with that amount of investment, it's unavoidable at this state. But I'm very optimistic that programmatic is going to be a very quickly scaling as the I think DSPs and the right second and third party data layers become available and accessible.
Peter, you see a lot of data at Tune. Obviously, there's no shortage of that, and you analyze a lot of it and share it with the industry. What are the biggest mistakes that you see marketers make when buying in-app, and sort of misconceptions that we can eliminate to make their buys more
Effective.
Blank there for a second. Thank you.
Yeah. Man, the mistakes. Well, I mean, we've been talking about fraud a lot, the spray and pray and buying on programmatic just because it's easy to buy. Not looking at things like click spamming and injection and all these things and understanding what's happening down funnel. That's definitely a big part of it. We also see, kind of a focus, well, definitely, we talked about this too, but definitely a focus on CPI just as like this obsession. And even folks that you would think would be like really evolved way beyond this, looking at that as their top level KPI that they want to share with the board. And a lot of VC dollars just kind of getting pumped into that. We actually were thinking about doing a study of like how many VC dollars are wasted on empty installs, like worldwide. Because it's like astronomical. It's completely wild. And we see, even customers of ours like ramp and then hit a brick wall, because of that. I think another mistake is not utilizing the web at all. Basically, you see some like mobile first and mobile oriented companies just say, I'm just going to get everything for an in-app. I'm not going to even have any kind of web experience or any kind of onboarding or any kind of bridge. Web has enormous inventory and it's intent-based primarily. It's driving for a real, adoption and everyone should have a web strategy. And if you're a marketer not thinking about web and app and how they relate to each other and how you move from one experience to the other, you're missing out massively. I could go on.
Please do.
Yeah, I think that another big thing is you've got kind of these different cooks in the kitchen. So in a Fortune 100, you got the brand folks and you got the performance folks, and they're both kind of like buying. They're kind of buying on top of each other, not really paying attention to what the other one's doing. And why is there even a difference? I don't even understand. All we're talking about is just measuring stuff, and whether that's considered a performance channel or not. And I have to say, it's been really cool. Back to that MMA boardroom, world of CMOs, that they're actually starting to think that way. And even, you hear executives of Facebook and Google, all brands going to be performance eventually. And so we're all moving that way together. And so, getting on the same page inside a marketing organization of what channels are you buying on and how does measurement impact that, rather than keeping the silos of brand or performance. That's a really big one that's really pervasive.
I'll definitely echo your point about web. I think there's so many businesses, I couldn't tell you how many I encountered that they say we're going to build an app, and they just build an app and they focus on kind of that experience, but they don't. And you kind of see a lot of the factors moving, that it's getting tougher and tougher to convince people to install apps every year. And I've seen a lot of businesses both fail here as well as succeed. Ones that have invested a lot in different flows and different paths to acquire users, and using the web as a really pointed weapon towards that. So that's definitely a huge one, I would say, as I've expanded more of my breadth from different industry to industry.
Thank you for that. So we all know that data is extraordinarily important when preparing for a successful strategy. And I wanted to ask particularly James and Guillaume, how do you use first and second and third party data? I think James has some really interesting experience in the past with Match. And of course, with Guillaume right now, he's looking for a very particular user. So how do you use the data? And if you have any advice on how to best utilize said data.
So we use primarily first-party data, and I think that we once in a while we'll find some pretty good third-party data, but generally, I think that the performance hasn't been as good. And so, one of the things that we do want to do is find partners and build direct relationships where we can share data. So it's a win-win relationship. And so we have some discussions with different brands or different tech partners that could enable the exchange of data to drive mutual good performance.
Yeah, sure. So first-party data is definitely going to be most effective when you have a lot of it, and when the modeling is really good against it too. So
it's structured.
Right. So Facebook and Google, you can kind of, I think you can have the whole world to explore with Facebook, and I think if you have really unique sets of data that people don't have, you can find users much more effectively and really acquire them more effectively. An example of that is, for Tinder, we have some unique data such as attractiveness and things like that, plus social dynamics match really well and help you to find those people really well. So
when's that DMP coming along?
It's you got to buy from Tinder, actually.
Okay.
But things like that make the dynamics really interesting, and also make because the modeling is so strong on some of these channels, you can do really unique things. Now, outside of these major channels, I think it really comes down to, when you look at third party, it's really first prospecting, right? And so we're always looking for really unique data sets that aren't the same thing. You're not buying the same blue sky segment everyone else is. For example, we've had some instances where we've bought unique second-party data where it's perhaps search terms that people have searched on an app, and they sell those segments to us. Things that might be relevant for, let's say, dating. Let's say you've searched for date spots or whatever on a food app. It could be something that's relevant for you, and just thinking about unique targeting that will let you get to that user or psychographic that you're trying to obtain. Also, on these sites or exchanges, using location, I think that's one thing that's really underused. Using that to kind of model behaviors, model users, and again, that psychographic, I think is something that's again really underutilized. I think a lot of data, the reason it's underutilized is because it's not productized as well as I think people. I think it's not as easy to be creative about using it, and it's not as easy to access that type of targeting that you'd like to come up with. So I think there's so much that's interesting and that can be achieved through this type of unique use of data. It's just I think it's been tough to find and scale these things up.
I love the first presentation around like get your first party house in order first. And if you're not doing that, then you've got nothing. You got to get that working. And it's like even in this world of like measurement, we even talk about multi-touch attribution. It's like, don't even talk to me about that until you're doing that at least just for mobile. Like just multi-touch just for get that one right, and then you can talk to me about omni-channel and television, all these other things, right? So get your house in order. Most companies are not even close to having that central, customer data platform, CDP, or having, maybe they've built it in silos and different pieces, but they can't really decorate it very well with the different kinds of data. They even have first party. So if you can't decorate and attribute with your own stuff, then you're going to have a real hard time doing it with the other parties. And I hate to be party pooper, but it's going to be interesting to see how the first and third interact post GDPR and where we're heading on this consensual basis thing. I think what these guys said about these direct relationships and like building those and making sure that those are strong and those are secure and the consents are in place and that the users understand the overlap and all those kinds of things. It's going to be super important. And the DMP and co-op world is going to have to continue to evolve to figure out how it's going to really service the industry as these consents get more complicated. So just to throw a wrench in just for fun.
Very exciting year ahead of us. A lot to look forward to. So throughout this discussion, we heard word programmatic used quite a bit by James and Guillaume and Peter. So what do you look for in a DSP when you're going out there acquiring users for your clients, James? And what do you look for in DSP, Guillaume, when you're looking to acquire quality users for Instacart?
Easy to buy. Just kidding.
That's right. No contracts, 30 outs, and free. So I think that, if you were to look at DSPs 5 years ago, I think that a lot of them, were pretty different and pretty unique in their own ways and had, were great at some things and maybe not as good at other things. I feel that that gap has really closed in many ways, and I feel that when I compare a lot of the DSPs, all of them have made major improvements over the last 5 years. For us, one of the most important thing is has this DSP, have they been thinking about how to measure incrementality? Have they been thinking about how to do this, cross platforms? Do they have, their own device graph to enable for true incrementality testing? Or if they don't have their own device graph, how are they thinking about building that either now or partnering with other solutions to enable advertisers to really measure what is the true lift on every ad dollar? So I think that for us, that's probably one of the most important thing when evaluating DSPs.
I think that's a great point on incrementality. I think specifically on technology is like one area that I really focus on. And I think because that's a lot of what makes the DSP successful, right? Is the optimization, it's the real machine behind it. And so I think there's two really main things. One is the ability to kind of bridge you very quickly towards the value actions that you actually care about. So taking in and effectively utilizing not only all the signals, but all the down funnel actions and being able to kind of read into those and to help you get to that goal much more effectively with, again, the least amount of, the least amount of waste, really. And then one other thing I really look for is, effective use of data, both probabilistic as well as deterministic data sets to help you to get to that goal. So I think, you're trying to triangulate and beat out every other option you have via other DSPs. So I think like these couple things, as well as the appropriate pricing model and business model, is really kind of what I look for overall.
I agree. Bottom funnel optimization is, it's if you're not doing that, then you've basically got nothing to offer to a performance marketer. I think also I do think the easy to buy thing is a part of this, actually. And I think it's because that's why people want to buy programmatic. They want to just like deploy. And how it is that you do that for a marketer that's buying, Facebook and Google, making it simple for them, making it clear that like these are the bounds, and doing your own homework on the fraud side and coming up with your own issues there, and providing like at least some collaboration with either their measurement partner or with their team on incrementality. Because with programmatic and mobile buying, you've got to have that incrementality as you launch off the ground. Otherwise, you really have no idea what's really going on under the covers, and we've seen a lot of advertisers really get screwed up and wrapped around the axle on that.
So as you take the programmatic route and you have access to millions and millions of impressions, the conversation of fraud becomes stronger and stronger. And we spoke about fraud earlier during this discussion. So Peter, you dedicated quite a bit of time during last postback to talk about fraud and how you guys look at it at Tune, and how the conversation sometimes tends to be a little bit less productive than it should be. So we would like to hear from you if you have any sort of recommendations as to how the industry can come together and look at the immediate steps that every player can take in order to provide for the best experience, not waste any dollars of your clients, and also be fair to publishers in case they do have quality users and they get marked as false positives.
Yeah, I mean, black box rules where no one really knows what the justification was just makes it hard for anybody to figure out, are we doing the right thing or are we not? There's definitely the argument that, fraud is playing whack-a-mole. And as soon as fraudsters know the rules, then they're going to try to break them another way. But that's what you do, is you just keep making the rules more difficult so that it's too costly, that it just doesn't make sense. Like if they're really going to have to do these like insane machine learning algorithms to get around your stuff to make it look like real human patterns on the long tail, like it starts getting really cost prohibitive. So to the extent that you can share as much as you can across, from publisher to advertiser, the reasons and the rules that were used, that's super important. The second thing I would say is that we have to work with the platforms themselves. So Android and iOS, they can help us a lot, and they've started to open up a little bit. We'll see if they continue to do that now, all the recent news. But something like click injection is a great example where it has been massive, and sometimes 60% of part of people's spend, they didn't even realize that click injection was happening. And Google stepped up to the plate and said, how do we just kill it dead? And we were able to launch that over the quarter. And the crazy thing, though, is that the advertiser adoption of it is not as much as it should be. And all it does is just straight up kill that chunk of fraud. And all you have to do is update your SDK. But there are things like that we can do to just, deterministically squash parts of the problem. And as you do those, you just make it more and more difficult and expensive for fraudsters to figure it out. I think that if we don't sort of have any kind of communication or collaboration around it, then it's just very difficult to find the stuff that is working for you and the stuff that is really valuable. And yeah, you can just go on over to Google and Facebook and just like throw all your budgets there, but know that your competitor is doing the exact same thing. And there's going to be some like law of diminishing returns someday there. And so not exploring outside of that is probably not a healthy worldview.
I would say back in 2016 at Match, we were also doing this whack-a-mole exercise just as along with everyone else, and got to the point where just frustrating. A lot of people were using these fraud third parties to kind of filter their traffic and say, hey, is this fraud or not fraud? And we kind of went the other way and said, screw this. We're just going to work directly with the sources that we understand and kind of just only accept certain traffic that, not only do but ones that make sense to begin with. So I think that was another route that we took to just avoid a lot of the, whack-a-mole to begin with, is just go and not work with sources that, are either questionable or just, or obfuscated. So, I think there's obviously both sides, and we decided to choose the safer end of the spectrum.
And they have to share back, by the way. Sub-publisher details, man. It's got to be there.
Thank you for that. So in our previous panel, we heard a bit of a discussion about header bidding. I know that here at Chartboost, we're really excited about the product. It's sort of the buzzword of the quarter, maybe even of the year. So I wanted to hear a bit from each and one of you, whether or not you see an opportunity there for your company and how you see the landscape shaping up as bigger players in the industry put more and more stock and resources into developing header bidding.
I'll start just by saying, any supply is good supply. Let's figure it out, and there needs to be better ways of scaling and buying everybody else, right? And so I definitely commend the effort to figure out how we're going to stitch this together. How are we going to work with lots of different publishers and other players to start to make that readily available and scalable and easy to buy. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for. And as long as you can continue to do it, protecting both sides and making everything as transparent and clear as you can, then the better, or the bitter.
Yeah, I think, it makes sense that that suppliers are focused on building such technologies. It's not something that we've thought about too much. So it's something that we'll continue to watch and monitor and develop a strategy from there.
Yeah, I'd say I haven't been stressing about it too much, mainly because it stresses really on the DSPs and the kind of these layers. And I'm hoping that they're going to be kind of ready for a lot of the changes impending and have been thinking about it for a long time. So I'm really hoping that they will kind of have the technology to help us to, again, continue to bridge to these goals. I think hopefully it will weed out a lot of advertisers that are just, placing bidding high just to bid, and kind of having to put their money where their mouth is now.
And I think we're kind of running low on time, so I'm going to try to close this with one a little bit more whimsical question. If you guys could have one wish that with a blink of an eye would come true, that would change the industry and basically make it so that it was more productive and more safe for suppliers and bidders and end users, what is it that would you wish for? Go wild.
I wish that everyone in this room uses Instacart. No, I'm just kidding. I wish that that there were more partners outside of Facebook and Google that had a true device graph, because I think that it's very limiting, and it's props to them for having built such a amazing graph and having built such amazing services. But I think that it would be hugely beneficial for all advertisers, and I think all publishers also, if there was another device graph that was that other people could tap into to drive better advertising experience for both consumers and for brands.
I would love for there to be some magical, identifier cross device for people across the entire world, and to be able to use that and build models off of it. Definitely wishful thinking, but perhaps LiveRamp will make it happen.
Peter?
Got two directions for this. I guess I would say there would be some magical solution to the user actually understanding the data that is out there on them and how it is used, while also empowering the advertising industry. I don't know how that works. And if someone can nail that, they will have a very big business. And it's been tried over the last decade and failed horribly in all different ways, and I'm not going to mention the ways. But if there was some way for users to understand that, because I kind of call it the age of consent. That's like coming on us, man, and it's happening everywhere. It's happening in politics. It's happening in social media. It's happening in advertising. Like, people want to know what the heck's going on with them, and they want to say, yes, I allowed that, and I'm cool with it. And so the user's becoming re-empowered. And so how is it that we could really, as an industry, connect that together and still have a really high performant and even more valuable experience.
Great, thank you so much. And I think on this, we're gonna open the floor to questions. If you guys have any, please let me know, and I'm gonna pass on my microphone because Pepe is gonna help us out here.
I have one question, actually. So you mentioned data being so important, and I want to hear about the most crazy way in which you've used data to build your audiences. And specifically for Instacart, I can imagine some of the craziness on Match.com, but specifically on Instacart, how do you use data in a crazy way to find shoppers, right? Because it's a very different strategy than finding users for the app, right? So these two questions.
So I don't think I can share it too much publicly, unfortunately. But the way we think about it is, using first-party data as the foundational layer. How can we leverage predictive models to try to determine and try to pick really the best potential shoppers for us. And so I think that it's one thing to look at your first-party data and then upload it to a third-party solution or and try to retarget them or let them find lookalikes for you. I think it's different if you take a look at your data, partner with your internal teams, your data science team, and try to figure out how can we ourselves predict, who is most likely to be the best shopper for us, and then use that data and then send that data to different third parties.
I think so many advertisers are just focused on finding more purchasers and valuable users, and that just using that as a singular dimension. I think what I've been really keenly focused on is finding, creating, targeting, and audiences that that my competitors cannot find. So, for example, combining like a depth of intent instead of a purchase value, depth of intent plus like some unique characteristics such as attractiveness, for example. Plus a demographic to craft something that what I don't believe my competitors will be able to beat me at, and then find a message to those users accordingly, and kind of use this as a way to craft several different dozens of segments and hopefully dominate the market.
I don't have like a direct example, and I can't honestly mention any of our customers and the craziest tactics that they've done. But I do think it's one that's interesting that has happened, and it's happened across a couple different verticals, so I feel like I can talk about it, is in the world of brick and mortar and foot traffic that of course you might want to message or interact with your consumer when they're in your store, right? But a lot of people don't focus on what do they want to do when they go into their competitor's store. And that's actually a really cool psychological thing to try to figure out, like, how do I become your friend again when you're cheating on me? And we've seen some really, really fun campaigns and experimental ways of kind of recapturing the consumer's mind and seeing the result of foot traffic returning.
2018 case study to look forward to, perhaps? Sounds interesting. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Hi, yeah, so you mentioned that in the long run, there won't be a distinction between brand and performance marketers, but obviously in the short run, it's still a huge problem. So I'm curious how you think performance marketers can compete with irrational brand bias.
Well, I don't think that brand guys are irrational, right? And I think I'm saying that although I'm not a brand advertiser in many ways, but I think that the way to level out the playing field is I think that over time brand advertisers will realize that they have to look for they have to pay attention to different KPIs for them to get additional budget to fund their marketing campaigns. And I think that performance advertisers will also realize that it's great to look at CPA or to look at traditional performance marketing KPIs, but as your company gets bigger and bigger, I think that you have to start looking at different metrics, right? And perhaps some of those metrics might include looking at brand awareness or different things. And so I think that as both brand marketers and performance marketers become better, more well-rounded, and better understand what really drives marketing value, then that playing field will be leveled out. I think it's probably pretty optimistic, but I think that with time, I think we'll get closer to that than ever before.
I think the best way to build a gap in a relationship is to remove the plank from your own eye first. And that usually means admitting that last click DR is also bullshit. And being open with that brand marketer about it, and understanding that like what is so powerful about a brand marketer is that they create a message, right? They capture heart, like that's their thing and that's what they want to do. And yeah, maybe they're doing it on TV right now and they think that's their golden goose. But what if you could bring them into your world? What if you could let them start to like bring some of their message and heart grabbing into the performance world and get them addicted to your data, and instead of like trying to shove your data onto their world? That's just one way that I've seen some folks kind of bring the whole organization even into a more performance orientation by not treating DR like DR and actually making this an experience and something that they can all celebrate with a sort of customer change that happens in that moment.
Thanks.
Hi. What are some obstacles to better measurement in app, and what can publishers do to improve measurability in apps in this panel's view?
Man, this came up earlier, like viewability in app, and like why isn't Moat in app, and what's keeping it from getting there? And again, it has more to do with like a lack of any kind of unification around monetization and exchange and all this kind of stuff. So I do hope that folks like Moat get involved in viewability and that starts to expand. I mean, it's totally missing, honestly. So that's definitely the biggest piece. And then, down funnel from that is, making it clear like what is a click and an install, and what's a reinstall, and what's all the LTV, and what's the value of that to the folks that think only in a viewability mindset. It's there, and so you'll literally hear brand marketers say like, you just can't measure mobile. And yeah, there's that one piece that you can't, but here's the other pieces that you can. And how do you ladder it back, right? How do you think about, well, when we did viewability in this other channel that was measurable and went down funnel, we saw these kinds of impacts. Now let's see if we could see similar kinds of impacts in the in-app world. What do we think the viewability was? So just do the backwards equation.
I have to say that at Chartboost, we're working on solving that problem. Our SDK does track viewability. Any other questions?
Thank you. I was wondering, what do you think the effect of Cambridge Analytica would have on a lot of your supply when now 80% of the supply that you guys usually buy from Google, Facebook are being more and more restricted on what they can share about their users?
Yeah, I think the key is really just going to be, we've always wanted to diversify. I think get away from kind of the duopoly, and this is really a lot of incentive too. And I think it'll also push us to not only leverage those third parties, but for third and second parties to also get better at finding ways to package together what they have for advertisers to use. So I think it's a good thing to kind of push the industry forward into evaluating and figuring out how to make these other channels more prominent and not kind of relying on this data that's been so great for the past past half decade.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that what happened shows that no one is immune to data leakage, right? And so I think that a lot of times you'll think that Google or Facebook are almost immune to that because they're very large companies. They have great very talented teams, but it can still happen to even them, right? So I think that sharing data and just even with large publishers like Facebook and Google, I think has to be. I think it's a process that should be reviewed very carefully, and because those things can happen and can have a major impact in the industry.
I think every advertiser should be clear about what data they have coming from Facebook and Google and what's coming into their own systems and what it is their teams are doing with it. Facebook has 5 million advertisers, and there's a lot of folks that have access device identifiers, or maybe it's something else that's more cookie based, but being really thoughtful about like what are you doing with that and being protective of that yourselves. Like just be very, very thoughtful as a brand. I think that's like number one. Make sure you're following the rules in every way possible. That's something that we always ask. Like if you're working with those partners, what are you doing with that data once it crosses the fence? And a lot of folks aren't actually aware, and it gets attributed and tagged on, and maybe finds its way into their CDP or their DMP, and like that stuff. Advertisers and you should be really, really thoughtful about that. The only other thing I would say is that I guess something about Tune is that we've always believed that the nature of traffic and of publishing is fragmented, and it is going to be. It's sort of like when the Big Bang began and the universe started expanding, and of course there's going to be some chunks that sort of get eaten up over time, and we saw it with AOL, and then we saw it with Yahoo, and then we saw it and there was a time, you guys remember, when everyone's like, Yahoo owns everything, so why care about anything else, right? But there's always everybody else, and there's always an opportunity of new publishers that will skyrocket, and also those that are hidden that you just you might not have found if you were only focused on the largest ones. The problem is scale. And at the end of the day, managing publisher relationships is hard. And if I can just manage 2 and I can get that kind of scale, man, that's just so easy. But that kind of goes back to the beginning of don't buy because it's easy.
Thank you, Peter. Oh, his microphone is definitely louder. I got gypped, guys. Well, thank you so very much for coming and joining us today. It was a great pleasure to have you. We're going to have a drink served after, and please stick around, ask some questions, shake some hands, make some connections, and perhaps something great will be born out of these conversations today. Thank you for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.